I'm going to start maybe in a somewhat surprising way with an unmade film.
Yeah.
And this is a kind of a longer document, a kind of longer pitch about a potential film written in 1994 called In the Early Hours of the Day. On this page of a longer document, as I said, from 1994, begins with 3 epigraphs, one from Edward Said, one from Stuart Hall, and one a Punjabi proverb. You say in the writing about describing this film that it presents a totally new way of looking at the British Asian experience. In style, it can be located somewhere between Terence Davies' Distant Voice, Still Lives, and Ozu's Tokyo Story. In spirit, as you say, it builds on my earlier films like I'm British But, Acting Our Age, and Baji on the Beach. Moving away from the more linear dramatic style of Baji, this film uses a multi-layered visual and musical montage style to tell the story of East African Asian migrants. It is the long-awaited tale of ancestry in India, of being a child and having a life in Kenya, and of growing old in Britain. And you also talk about using archival footage and dramatic reconstructions of key historical events. So as part of this Women's Screen Work in the Archives Made Visible, I had the opportunity with Jess to look through the boxes of material that you've donated before they've been cataloged. And this stood out to me for it being a kind of early unmade films and things that we know happen. A lot of films don't get made, but also the way it seems to describe very well in this unmade film, your sort of investment in telling these stories, the diaspora, that have been so much the theme throughout your work. So I wondered if you could use that as a kind of starting point, maybe what your memories of trying to get this film made, how it's influenced maybe later films, and thinking about the importance of diaspora across all of your films.
Well, I was lucky to make I'm British But, because I trained as a journalist, and in the 80s I was a journalist for the BBC. When I was at university at UEA, I'm going to give the BFI this clip of me from 1981 where I'm presenting a TV show on the university TV thing. It's horrible. I'm horrible in it. I say terrible things about the Eurythmics and stuff like that. It's embarrassing now to look at it, but honestly. But it shows how I was playing with the idea of representation really early on. And then after being a journalist, I loved that whole music scene that burst open in the 80s, the whole Bhangra music scene, which is where I'm British But came in. Yeah. And my good friend Kate Webb, she kind of talked a lot about film, and I'd met her at a film conference, in fact. And I had told her I wanted to make a pop promo about one of the songs. And the more we talked about it, she said, you should make a film. And I said, well, I've never been to film school. I don't know how to make a film. And she said, do you think people who go to film school know how to make films? And Kate, interestingly, was a projectionist for a while at the Ritzy. And once this film came in with a very gratuitous rape scene, and she was so offended that she cut it out. She cut it out of the print and
literally took the scissors. Okay,
literally. So that was Kate. Anyway, I ended up listening to her and applied to the BFI, got the grant, and made I'm British But. So I've always fallen into filmmaking as such. And then Karen Bambra at Channel 4 at the time, Film 4, she saw I'm British But and said, wow, this is a new voice, something different. I'm going to nurture her. So it was Karen who brought me in, put me together with Mira Sial, and the two of us together made Baji on the Beach. But that was completely Karen Bambra doing that. She was my sort of angel at the time. So I had this very sort of false idea of how easy it was to get films made. So after, of course, I'm British But and Baji on the Beach, then came The Real World. And this was something I wanted to do because I thought people wanted to hear what I had to say about myself and my thoughts and my views. And so I wrote this very painful kind of also it was at the time when I was making films, it was also the time of the whole Black British film movement. So you had John Acumpha and Black Audio Film Collective, you had Sankofa, and of course Nadine and I made Bargee on the Beach. And so I was part of this whole group of people, but they were all, they had all studied film and art and were coming at it from a particular point of view, whereas I was coming at it as a journalist and also very populist. And so there was a sort of disconnect, if you like, because I wanted to tell stories of exile and migration and all that, but not in and I famously said at the time, much to their annoyance and my chagrin now, is I said to them, well, I want to make films where the people who are in the films understand the films. I'm not making them for university professors. Right. So I remember saying that at the time, and now I would never say that, obviously, but I just have. But it gives you an idea of what I was thinking. I was thinking that film should be for people like my cousins and me, as opposed to be studied. And I felt a lot of those films were being made to be part of a discourse on academic work, And so this was a sort of bridge, I think, with Edward Said popping up in there and Stuart Hall. So I was obviously trying to bridge that gap, but this never happened because I realized that actually the industry wasn't that interested in what I had to say. Truthfully, what the industry wanted was for me to do what they wanted. And after I made Bargee on the Beach, I remember being in America, in Los Angeles, and getting all these offers for Hollywood films. And I could never understand why they were giving them to me. Because I was like, how come they've seen Bargee on the Beach and they're giving me Romy and Michelle's high school reunion?
No, really?
Yeah, that was one of them.
Oh my God, I wish that film existed.
They made it.
No, I didn't make it.
Yeah, me make it, yeah. But I was at the time thinking, well, I don't understand. But that was because I was very British, and America's culturally very different. And then I was British and I was Asian and so I didn't always know how to read American content at the time. But then I did think, okay, if they want me to make an American film, I'll make one. And that's when I made What's Cooking, which is actually a very British film about LA. But going back to this, I realized that I had to find a way to tell my stories in a way where they didn't realize I was telling my story, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I think that Bend It Like Beckham was, a fantastic act of subversion in that it is a film that is completely about racism and the racism that the father went through and how he's trying to protect his daughter from it and realizing that he can't, he has to let his daughter go out and live her life, and by placing it in the world of football, which was a no-go area for women, completely no-go area back then, and using David Beckham, in Bride and Princess, when the mum gets up to do that dance, Paul said, "Oh, it's the Victoria Beckham dance." That was quite funny. Full circle. Anyway, I kind of realised how to subvert to get what I want. And even now people will say, oh, it's such a great comedy, it's such a great this, such great. And when I say, no, it's about racism, people flinch when I say that because they don't think it is. Right. But, ultimately that is what it is.
Do you feel like it's become that, or did people get it more early days and now it's become, because it's been so popular, because it's so beloved by young people or people who remember it, got them into football? Do you feel like it's become kind of more, lost that edge maybe?
No, I think what it is, and this is really interesting watching this film right now again, having made it 20 odd years ago. The word of the evening is instinct. Yeah. It's instinct. And everything that I do, that I did then and I do now, is I follow my instinct. And sometimes people come with me on it and sometimes people don't. but I can't help it if you don't get it, is my approach. And if you get it, you get it. So with Bend It, if you get it, you get it. Same with Bargee on the Beach, same with everything, because I come from a place where I'm multilingual, I'm multicultural, I'm part of a diaspora. I understand the, what do you lot call them? Transglobal processes, whatever, all that stuff.
Whatever we call it.
All that semiotic stuff about moving between cultures and spaces and all that. But because I do it every day, so when I create a world, it can be inhabited by all kinds of nuances and authenticity that is truthful to me as who I am. Now, some people will get that and some people won't. But a film like Bend It, and even this one, Bride and Bargee, if you come from the same background as me, you're going to get a whole different take to it than if you're coming from a different background. However, if you're a woman, you're going to see it differently often to how blokes particularly bend it, right?
Yeah.
That's not to say those people aren't excluded and it's not for them, because I've gone out. I always go out to make films for everybody. I never discriminate. I'm like 4 quadrants, all age groups, all genders, all everything is what my starting position is, always that. But I always know that there'll be elements that some people will get and won't get. So, for example, the opening of Bride and Prejudice, I have used Bollywood film language throughout. Some people will know it, some people won't. If you know Bollywood in its detail, you'll get it. If you don't, so the very opening opens with a Sikh chant and the Golden Temple. And that's because every Bollywood film opens with a religious moment of some kind, right? And so, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do my version of that. So I'm going to do a Sikh version. Because normally it's a Hindu god, with incense or something like that. So, like, right from the get-go, I say, right, this is the language, but I'm going to interpret it as mine. And all the way through obviously, Jane Austen, every scene is from Jane Austen, every scene. The mother is, really very not 6 Degrees at all from the TV series Mum, played by, what's her name? Alison Steadman, yes. So that was Alison Steadman in my head, but an Indian version. Yeah. And so you have obviously Jane Austen there, but you also, the snake dance was lifted completely from from Nagin, which is a huge Bollywood iconic symbol and character, which is a woman who gets possessed by a cobra and then does this freaky dance. But in traditional Bollywood films, it's a scary woman who's really in control. So because she can't be a woman in control, she has to be kind of made into something scary. Yeah. And so I took that cobra thing and made it funny. And I made it that sort of British slapstick humor there, basically. So that all the way through, every moment, every scene goes from these different polarities of Bollywood to Hollywood or British, musicals, to Britishness, to Indianness, to Americanness, if you like. Like, it's always like this. It's never in one place. It's never, And so that's what makes it very hard, I think, for people to write about what I do or talk about what I do, because it's always, you can't get a handle on it, And actually, I remember when Bride and Prejudice came out, I remember Sight and Sound. We're being filmed here. I remember Sight and Sound got an Indian guy to review it, right?
Right.
And because they thought they were doing the right thing by getting an Indian guy. But the guy they got, actually, was a very, very Indian guy from India, as opposed to British. And he didn't understand what I was doing and why I was doing what I was doing, because he was, you know, he looked down on Bollywood anyway, I think, as a lot of people do, you know, and so it was a complete misdirect, you know, and I think he really criticized it. I remember, but then it was like a few years later, he actually wrote a screenplay for an Indian film, a Bollywood film, which was so misogynistic and just so disgusting that I went up to him and I said, "See this? It's not easy, is it? It's not easy. Look at the shit that you've written and how offensive it is to women. You know, you should be ashamed of yourself."
Yeah, should be. Yeah.
He just was like, he just looked at it. I said, "See, it hurts, doesn't it?" But I'll say that not because I don't mind bad reviews. I actually quite like bad reviews.
Okay.
Because it just, for me, it always confirms what I'm saying to you.
Yeah.
That people don't get it. They're gonna interpret and say what they think I'm doing. And I always go, "Oh, well, sorry, mate, you missed it." And I always think whenever I make a film that in 30 years' time, people come back and go, "Oh, okay, we get it now." I always think that I'm not making it in the moment. I'm making it for the future. I mean, this was made 20 years ago, but it's still played, apart from all the reference to the Queen, bless her, you know, and the mobile phones and all that, and the MSN emails. Yeah. But anyway, my point is that been part of or even helped create a whole new genre, which I call the diaspora, filmmaking from the diaspora. And the main person who did that before me, in my opinion, was Ong Lee with Wedding Banquet. Mm. So that was the film that I went, "Oh, okay. He's got Chinese parents. He's got an American Chinese gay guy. Yeah. He's got an American gay guy, and he's having fun with all the interactions, right? And I'm not Chinese, but I got everything in it." And that's what I mean by diaspora filmmaking. It's when films are made from the inside, when that person is multilingual or multicultural, whatever, inhabits all these different cultural spaces and puts that in their vision. And it's the DNA of the story that they're telling, because it's showing you the fluidity of how we, who are multicultural and multilingual, how we see the world. And most of the people who write about films or finance films or distribute films or are the film industry are monolingual and monocultural. And so they never get those nuances. Yeah. Now, as women inhabit different spaces in the same way. Right? Yeah. So women are, "Oh, you have to be like this at home. Oh, you have to be like this at work. Oh, you have to be like this to get on. Oh, you have to be like this to be heard." So women are very good at doing that, you know, kind of moving and being fluid, because that's the world that we inhabit. You know, that is what patriarchy is. Mm. And so when you then end up with female characters in this mix, you've got another double whammy. Yeah. Of some people not being able to understand why was Bend It Like Beckham so popular? Yeah. Why is this film so popular? Why? So a lot of people don't understand, but it's an instinctual thing of you being able to see something that represents you or part of you that is very rarely seen on screen.
Yeah, and it's just not seen as this. It's universal, even if it is. Like every few years, there's some film like yours or Barbie that does really well, and the newspapers are always like, "Wait a minute, women go to the movies?" Yeah. And it's just like, yes, of course we do. I have one little question about this. Again, I think one of the reasons I took a special note of it is because it tells the story of an elderly couple, right, who moved from India through Kenya. It's like from their perspective in the present, and they're having memories, thinking back to being in India and moving through Africa over, you know.
Yes. So that was my parents.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason it caught my attention because I had just seen Christmas Karma, and that is effectively Sood's story, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It seems to me that this has come out.
Yeah. What year was this written?
1994.
So forgive me, but I've no memory of. I mean, I just read that page.
Yeah.
But I can't remember the rest of it.
Well,
I remember it was 3 songs. Wasn't it 3 songs?
It's
And we
like
keep
vignettes,
intercutting between 3 songs.
Yeah, non-linear. Yeah, I guess that's my point about Christmas Karma. It seems like it's still stuck in there. It's come out because that's his story, right?
Well,
He
that
told it through there.
yeah. Well, Christmas Karma was really came out of me wanting to do a Christmas movie because of my love for It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
And just we don't have a Christmas movie like I would make.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make one, and It's a Wonderful Life it was inspired by Charles Dickens, and so I decided I would do my version of that, and my Scrooge is very wealthy, very mean Indian businessman, and this was at the time of Priti Patel and Suella, whatever fucking name is now, has gone to that side. I mean, it's like it was all that was going on. And so there was this sort of thing where being an Indian woman, I should support other Indian women.
Right.
And I was getting kind of that vibe. And then for Halloween, I went as Priti Patel. And everyone thought it was hilarious. It was just a navy jacket and pearls and a very smarmy smile wherever I went.
That was brilliant.
So I kind of was playing with that basically. And the truth is, their parents were refugees and immigrants, right? So I was trying to understand that.
Yeah.
And so my Scrooge is, says all those things at the beginning, which you think are, he says there's a limit to how many people this island can hold and things, right? And then when I wrote the script, it was funny. I thought, well, this was funny. And then it all started being really real. And I was like, oh, and so those lines weren't funny anymore. They were like really real because the planes were going off to Rwanda and stuff. So it was like I was writing it as comedy, and then it was like too real. And then by the time the film came out, was in the middle of, the whole Gaza war, and then what you end up with is a story of a boy who loves his home and is being forced to leave his home because of a dictator, and he comes to Britain, very hostile environment, and as a refugee, and learns that his family were from India and taken by the British at the time to Uganda, and then Idi Amin had a fight with Britain and said, right, fuck you, take all the Indians out. Yeah. And so it was Idi Amin who was cross with England, with Britain. Yeah. And then the Ugandan Asians were pawns in all this. And this kid ended up in Britain. And then that's why he then turned to money, because he thought money would protect him from racism. And so the story then, Charles Dickens' wonderful story, is how are the ghosts of past, present, future going to turn this guy around? I thought, what a beautiful way to look at society today. And I thought it was a great film actually for my kids and their friends who see race very differently to when I was growing up. Because what I was trying to do was, again, race and representation, give you an idea of what Britishness means, what Britishness is. And I have every right to make a Christmas film from my perspective because I grew up here and I celebrate Christmas. Yeah. And I do it my way. But it's just the way the country changes and shifts. Yeah. And I'm part of that. And so now we find a different way to put our ideas forward. And we keep pushing the same idea of using storytelling as a force of shifting people's ideas. We've just got to find clever ways to do it. And that's what Bend It Like Beckham did all those years ago. It shifted the dialogue and the debate around race back then. Yeah. And I do believe in the power of cinema to do that.
Yeah. Yes. Excellent. Excellently well said. But picking up on Britishness, which you've said a few times, and to use one of those annoying scholarly words like hybridity, being British Asian, what I have up here is a letter from Gordon Brown from January 2010. And it just says, I wanted to write to you to say how much I appreciated your help earlier this week. I was very moved by your speech and your support. It isn't always easy to be a fighter for fairness and equality, and your whole family can be very proud that you're not only a truly brilliant filmmaker, but such an advocate for social justice.
Oh my God, how sweet. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I just wondered if you remembered it or what was the context of that. But it goes back to that thing of you were just saying, I'm British. I have a right to make Jane Austen and my versions of The Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
You do. And I think this kind of why I threw that up there to think about if you remember that context or I guess even.
No, I know Gordon and Sarah, and I remember them very well. I do remember when I made Bend It, we had a screening at Brentford at Waterman's, and the MP for the area, Anne Keane, I think it was, Anne wanted me to do it, and at the end of the evening, she presented me with a bottle of House of Commons claret. And I was like, oh, wow, this is nice. And she said, read it. And I opened it and I thought, and on it said, loved your movie, Tony Blair. And then I turned it around the other way and it went, me too, Gordon Brown. And I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be worth a lot of money. This is going to be worth a lot of money. And I put it away. Because remember, before Bend It came out, I didn't have any money. I had very little money. So I was like, oh, this is going to be worth money. So I put it away and I thought, oh, I'm going to keep it. I'm not going to drink it because it's going to be worth everything. Iraq war, weapons of mass destruction. Like now it's like embarrassing to have this bottle of claret that I prize. But I'm going to give it to the archive. How about that?
Excellent. Yes.
You can have it. Do what you want with it.
Excellent. It will fit
it's
right
embarrassing. Every time I look at it, I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, okay. Let's move on then. That's great.
But Gordon was a different kettle of fish in some ways. And Sarah, his wife, I knew because all the wonderful work they were doing, with charities. And so, I appreciated that, and also, I'm actually, I do have a relationship with the now King Charles, who, and I met his mother many times, and when I would go to film events in Buckingham Palace and that, I was one of the people that you always used to say, you come first. So when she walks into the room, she will talk to you. And they felt comfortable with me. And partly because I remember having a conversation with her about Kenya, because my dad was one of the people standing outside treetops when she got the news of her father dying. And he always used to say, oh, I saw her. She went in as a princess and she came out a queen, And my dad saying that. And I had told her that story. And so I think she that. And then, of course, she gave me my OBE. And she said, I thoroughly enjoyed your film, and all that. And so I got to meet her. But, I have a lot of time for, and Charles helped me when I was making my film on partition of Viceroy's House. And in fact, it was Charles who told me about the book that I ended up making the film about, because, he knew about that book. No, none of us knew about it. And so, he was like very happy that I was doing that. And then with Christmas Karma, he was so upset with some of the stuff that was going on around it that he made a point of doing a personal appearance with me just before Christmas. And I went to meet him somewhere and gave him a jumper. And, we had a whole chat. And he was really upset about it because the guy who runs the British Asian Trust for him, Hittin, who I talked to Charles through, Hittin had been walking down Bushy High Street in December, and someone had come up to him and called him a packy and told him to go home, fuck off home. This is a guy who works with Charles and is with him, every week. And he told the king that, and the king was just so upset about it. And and so he came to my support,
That's really
he sent that message about Britain and Britishness. Yeah,
and that kind of Britishness that Gordon Brown used to really advocate for the most, and that multicultural. And
I think we need to be, we're at an interesting time now with reform around the corner, and with in 1978. We were overrun by the National Front, and I grew up in a corner shop. My mum and dad had a shop, newsagents. And, what you forget is that, as a child, when sometimes you're left in the shop, you know that at any moment someone can come through that door and hurt you. That was the deal. You never knew when someone was going to come in and rob you or hurt you. So now, I would never put my kids in that position, but that's what used to happen when families had shops, right? And so you sort of grow up with this sort of terror, and so hence, I was of that generation that was, became very active around racism. And I remember in 1978, there was this march being organized for Rock Against Racism. Yeah. And I told my dad that I want to go. And my dad said, no way, you're going to get beaten up and killed by all these National Front people. And I was a little scared. And I said, okay, I won't go. I'll go to CNA then. Anyone remember CNA? I used to love CNA. Anyway, it was like an old department store, right? So I thought, okay, I'm going to go to CNA. And, but of course I didn't. But I was too scared to go on the demo because I did think I would get beaten up and I didn't know what to expect. And it was the first of its kind. So I actually went straight to the park where everyone was going to meet, and then the Clash were playing and various other bands were going to play, Tom Robinson, and Brockwell Park. And I took the bus there and I waited, and nothing happened. And I saw the Clash do the sound check, and then I was there like 2 hours, a good 2 hours, nothing happened. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna leave now because I don't want it to get dark and whatever. And as I was leaving by the gate, I heard this terrible sound and I didn't know what it was, and I was absolutely scared. And it was a very high pitched sound, but I was also curious. And there was this big phone box thing. There was those green boxes, and I stood up on one of those to try and look and see what it was. And as I looked down the street, I saw hundreds and thousands of people walking towards the park, blowing whistles. They were all blowing whistles because it was like a really loud anti-racist demonstration. And they were all walking, and all different backgrounds, everything, big banners, loads of trade union leaders, like loads of people. And I remember I remember the moment so clearly. And I stood there and I went, they're on my side. I remember thinking that was such a seminal moment for me. And then I thought, I'll get off this. But I couldn't because there were so many people coming through. I was stuck up on this thing for about an hour. And I was like, oh my God. And then, of course, it was absolutely packed. And then that was the birth of those kind of demonstrations. And I was so lucky to be part of that, because then that formed, for me, everything. That was the moment I became political. That was the moment when I started dyeing my hair.
Colors, I presume. Bright colors.
That's what I mean. But that was protest, right? That was protest. But, I became very close to the Specials and Terry Hall. And I loved the Specials. I was part of that whole 210 thing. I'd go around the country. I was on Top of the Pops the day they were on Top of the Pops with Message to You, Rudy. But I couldn't go in front of the cameras because my parents didn't know I was there. So I was sort of radical, but sort of in the background. But because I otherwise they would have been mad that I didn't go home to the shop. So I was on Top of the Pops, but every time a camera went past, I would go like that. But the thing is, my point is that formative time, has informed everything that I've done. Yeah. And even Christmas Karma, it comes back. Because those demos in the 70s outside the refugee camps look exactly like the flag waving and whatever is happening today.
It's like it's in Blinded by the Light as well. You were talking about that. All I could think about was Blinded by the Light.
Yeah, it was in there too.
The music and all the things he's experiencing, and
Yeah, the interesting thing about Blinded was we asked for people who looked like NF people to come and be part of the demo for extras, and we also had people from the SWP there who were like telling us what the chants were, that they would demonstrate against. And so when all the extras first came on, it was absolutely scary because it really did look like an NF march. And if you see the film, it is like, oh my God, is that archive or is that real? It was real. And someone did it over here, someone at one point saying, oh, this is more like it. We can't do this anymore, can we? Someone said that. But then there was another point after 2 takes of the big demo coming. The AD said to me, there's a problem. A bunch of people don't want to do it again. And I had to go and talk to them and explain to them, because a lot of them were young people who hadn't been there, obviously, you know. And they said, we don't want to do it because we don't want to be racist. Right. And we don't want to say these terrible things. We can't act it. And I was like, wow, that's so interesting. And then I told them, explained the context and everything. They were like, oh, okay, one more take then. And so yeah, I had to, again, that was such a mind fuck to do that. But it's so authentic in the film and it's so real. And the whole crew, the first take, which is the one I used, the big master, everyone was sort of slightly shaken with it.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. It's quite visceral watching that scene. It's hard to watch. Quite a big shift here, sorry. But the next thing I have on the slide is the Jane Austen book. It was in your archive. And it's the collection of Pride and Prejudice, Northanger Abbey, Persuasion, and Emma. And we've talked about the adaptation.
Did I write in it? Is there notations in it?
Yes. This is not one with notations,
Okay.
So it's just the book itself. And it looks like the book...
So I'm not trying to rewrite Jane Austen, am I? No. Thank God for that.
It looks like the book that's in the film, right, Jess? That she's reading herself when she's on the beach lounging.
Yeah.
And I listened to your...
Jane is not being clear here. I need to make it clearer and sexier.
Much sexier. But I listened to your BBC Two Sounds interview with Paula Byrne, that series When I Met Jane Austen, and you say this lovely thing. You say, what is brilliant about Jane Austen and then me adapting her work is to show how clever and how universal women's wit and intelligence is. And society may try to put us in boxes and may try to silence us, but women actually always know how to duck and dive and get what they want. And I love the way you said that, linking yourself to Jane Austen and having that kind of wit and wisdom and kind of playfulness, but also, having to play the game like you were talking about earlier. We have to be like this here and be like that there. And so I put that next to these 2 photos. Baji on the beach on the set on the left and Bride and Prejudice on the right. And thinking about how many of your films do center women and often foreground women's friendships, such as in these 2 films in particular and others. Thinking about what is it about particularly maybe telling stories about friendships between women, not just a woman's story, but like collective stories, the best friends and like that. Is there something about female friendships that you get drawn to?
Oh yeah, definitely, of course, yeah. I mean, we rule the world and we control the world, really. And so if you get a woman behind the camera, that's what she's going to show, right? Is that perspective, because it's not really valued by a lot of other people. Yeah. But I also think women make really good films about men as well, because we just show them differently, and I think that see the world from a particular perspective, and I show that really.
And it's I like these photos that Grace helped me pick out, because on the left is Nadine.
That's Nadine.
We worked with you in the early days and is such a great producer. And over here is Pat, remember, the script supervisor. And like working with different women on the set in kind of key roles. I was thinking about that in relation to this book that I found in your archive, or that Jess found in your archive. Yeah. It's called Girl Director, a how-to guide for the first-time flat-broke filmmaker and video maker. It was published in 2001. And there's loads of women filmmakers, from Jane Campion, Sally Potter, Myra Nair, who had little quotes. And your quote says, Desert Hearts, that was a great film directed by Donna Deitch. Myra Nair's film, Salem, Bombay, because it's so moving. Susan Saddleman's Desperately Seeking Susan is great fun. It is. Born in Flames, Lizzie Borden was the first feminist film I ever saw. Marlene Gorris's films A Question of Silence and Antonia's Line, those feminist films. And anything directed by Catherine Bigelow, the Royal Action Babe, because she's so individual in her choices. So I just love this eclecticness of types of films and types of women filmmakers.
I was playing to the crowd.
Yeah, no, of course. But I guess probably the question of like, who would you talk about now in terms of other women filmmakers?
Oh my Lord. Oh, other women. Well, I was going to say Soderbergh is someone I really love.
Okay, great. Yeah, no,
Steven Soderbergh, I think, is fantastic as a director. Always interesting choices. I like him a lot. I think, you know what? It's a difficult question because there's so many moments from so many films that I think are really great. If you know what I mean, as opposed to a whole. There's so many moments that I really like, and I think, oh, that's nailed it. And I think what I always move towards is authenticity. And if something touches me or moves me, and is authentic. But, I've begun to love documentaries a lot more. I've gone sort of back to that. And I find myself, watching documentaries in much more now than drama. Partly because with drama, I kind of can see how it's done. And I know when we're coming to the end of Act 1 and Act 2. And I know, they didn't quite push it in Act 2. And okay, now we've got Act 3. How are we going to do this? How are we going to resolve this? So it's become a little bit like that for me. Although I did see Marty Supreme and I really liked it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was great. And then I met the director and I'm like, okay, he's got ADHD. And it's like, so I liked that about it because it is, if it is like that, it's very manic. And I liked it because I met the director and I thought, oh yeah, okay, I can see now where like the authenticity of it. So I think it's that authentic thing that I search for and look for, and as opposed to painting by numbers.
So the other thing this title of this book made me think of is, are you still the patron of Women in Film and Television UK?
I don't think I am actually.
But you were.
I was.
For quite a long time.
Yeah.
Yes, and you are at this stage, and don't anyone quote me on this, but I think at this point you have made more films than Betty Box. You are Britain's most prolific woman filmmaker. And do you ever?
You guys did a study on that.
Yes,
the BFI did a study, and that's what came up. Yeah.
Yeah, and at this point now with Christmas Karma, you've made more films than Betty Box, who's always pulled out as like the most prolific British woman filmmaker. In the mid-century, and being the patron. And if this is an uncomfortable question, but how do you see yourself as a woman director? Is that a position that you hold in relation to being British Asian, thinking about diaspora, or is that something that?
No, I definitely see myself as who I am. I definitely see myself as the director of all these different combinations. But I actually think as we go forward, I think that independent cinema is in such a terrible place right now. People aren't going to the cinema, and unless a streamer supports your film, you're not going to get it made. And streamers want certain kinds of films. And so I think it's a very tricky time. But I think what is good is to have a unique voice as well, and hopefully there's a way, although DEI is like illegal now. But I think that there was a time when having a very unique take and a unique voice, was a good thing and to be prized. And I can never not be that unique voice, and now, I get sent really interesting scripts by other people that pique my interest. I've just got sent a script. I haven't read it yet, but I just got sent a script about this Indian woman who lived on an Indian reservation for a while and had an affair with an Indian. So it's a romantic comedy with an Indian, like me Indian, and a Native American. And I'm like, how's that going to work? And she's billed it as, you've got to read it because it's Bend It Like Beckham meets My Big Fat Greek Wedding. So that was the email I got.
That's
and
an
I'm like,
sell for sure.
But that's interesting because I've not seen that film.
No.
I've not seen anything with Native Americans in that way, where you can have gags, and I do like a little bit of genial racism, I have to say. And what I mean by that is cultural gags, when you do them, when you're in control of them, because it's authentic and it's funny because it's very human, and I think that kind of authenticity is I see less and less on cinema, those kind of three-dimensional characters. But where it's alive and well is on Reels, on Insta. And that's where the diaspora is thriving, people saying, oh, Indian parents be like, and then you watch go, oh my God, that is my mum, or oh my God, that's me now, kind of thing. Like, and some stuff is very funny, the cultural stuff. That's what I like, is all the cultural stuff. And it's storytelling, but in a different way. There's one I looked at the other day. It's a guy in America who's very funny, who goes between speaking with an American accent, but also speaks Punjabi, and he goes back and forth, and he's out in the park, and there's all these Chinese people playing pickleball, and he's saying, look at this, look, the Chinese, they're out here, they're playing pickleball, they're so healthy, they live to 200, and look at us. we get up, we have tea with 10 sugars in, we moan and gossip, so-and-so's got off with another woman, so-and-so's daughter's left her husband, so all this, we need to get up and do exercise. It's just very funny, but that could be a character quite easily, but that's a young guy obviously playing his dad or something. So like that's kind of where a lot of that creativity is, if you're part of the diaspora. But I hope there are people who still, I get messages all the time from people inspired by Bend It and whatever, and I hope that they get their films made and get their stories out there. But I do think we're at such a time where, I worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's because people don't expect stories about us to be joyful. People want to tell stories about ourselves where we're suffering and we're all, gonna kind of kill ourselves because we're having arranged marriages or whatever, So like I grew up with, that was the view of me and my life, and that I had some kind of cultural crisis because I could speak Punjabi as well as English. And so it was always this thing where, oh, you're the problem because you culturally don't fit in. And so I'm very conscious when I make a film that I'm blasting that out and saying, actually, that's not true, because my dad is super funny, and so's my mum, and they're the parents in Bend It, all that dialogue, all that is my mum and dad, At one point, my daughter, who sat there during Bride and Prejudice, she turned around and she said, thank God you're not like that, mum. That's what she said. And I'm like, you haven't met my mum. Anyway, the point is that I am a product of people totally putting me in boxes and saying, you should do this, you should do that, you should. And I go, bite me, and I laugh about it. So we called it Bend It because we wanted a football term, and obviously that's what David Beckham did, but also everyone thought that someone like me would have to break the rules and rebel in order to have what I want. And that meant breaking away from my background, my family, my parents, and going off and being Western. And what we showed with Bend It is that if you bend things slightly, you can get what you want. And you just have to know how to bend to get the goal. And so bend it is that, and it's become part of the vernacular now for some people. It's don't break it, bend it, although I did get a message saying, we don't want to see that bend it like Brooklyn dance from you. So like keeps coming back. But with David Beckham, when we wrote the script, we started working on the script in 96, 97. It took a long time to get that film made. And at that point, David Beckham was this young guy living his dream in, Manchester United. And he had curtains for hair, and he was going out with a Spice Girl. And he was a gay icon. And he did, he wore a sarong and he wore underpants, that you could see. And all these gay guys were like, ah. So we were like, oh, well, that's very 90s, he's like metrosexual. And so we thought as a footballer, he was a great choice. And we wrote to him and said, we want to use your images. And he said, I will support this film because I want more families to come to see football matches. I need more people on the terraces, and I support women and women's football. And he signed it over. Fast forward to when the film bloody came out 6 years later, he was then Brand Beckham, and he was like huge, and he got married to Victoria at that point, but we still carried on. And then when the film was finished, suddenly all his team were like, hold on a minute. And then we went,
He signed it. It's right here. We have it.
And then because he married a girl power icon, it was like he couldn't really come out and be anti-girls and football. But to be fair to him, he never said anything. It was his people were like, oh, what are you trying to do? But there was a karma thing here. When we went to America with the film, Fox wanted to change the title because nobody knew who Beckham was. And everyone was totally confused with that title. And they wanted to call it Soccer Girls or something like that, and like something that said soccer, And I kept saying, oh, no, it doesn't fit. We need bend. And so in the end, that title remained because we couldn't think of anything else for America. And I did interviews in America with people saying, who is Beckman? And I said, no, it's Beckham, David Beckham. And no one knew who he was. A few people said, oh, is he the cute soccer guy married to the Spice Girl? That's how people knew him. And then after the film's success, his name went everywhere. And then he got that 250 million gig with Galaxy. So it kind of worked out for both of us.
All right.
Although for kids now watching the film, it's very weird to see David Beckham because he means something totally different now.
There's flat caps and
yeah, but he's 50 and he's a dad of these four, and now with all this recent stuff. So whilst the film still plays, that thing's a bit strange, I think, for some people watching it. And on that note, there was an Indian girl I saw who had written about the film and had watched it again, a young girl, and she was watching it with her niece. And she's only 23 or something. And she wrote this whole thing about how much she loved the film. It was really great. It still stands up. She said, but she thought the only thing that was wrong with it was that she thought that Indian parents would let their girls play football. And I was like, wow, that's so interesting that I'm like, you should have been there in the 90s. Well, you just have to be clear about why you're making the film. And I wanted to make a film about partition that didn't apportion blame to any side. And also when there was violence, you didn't know who was doing the violence against who. Because I just wanted to make a healing film about that period and sort of tell the story of my grandmother and how my grandfather found her in a refugee camp. And interestingly, I knew I had to make a film about partition, which is partly from going back to the beginning. And so that is my favourite film that I've made. Viceroy's House is hands down my favorite film that I've made. And I feel that, again, it's instinct. That film is made by a British Asian mother and Punjabi as well. And I say Punjabi because Punjabi means Indian and Pakistani. So those are definitely the thought process behind every moment of that film comes from that identity. And so and interestingly, in India, it never got released in English in my version, and they ended up releasing a dubbed Indian version, which was, not as kind in places politically, so I was kind of upset about that. And I think it was also a film that not many people saw because they want me to make Bend It Like Beckham over and over again. But I think that it's a version of history from my perspective. And I think as time goes on, for every film that is made, there are probably 5 that didn't get made, and that's true of me. I have a fantastic film about freedom fighters that I want to make. And I first wrote it as a TV series. I thought, no one's going to finance this. Then I thought, well, how can I do it? Maybe I'll do it as a stage play. Maybe I'll do it as a stage musical. How am I going to? So I keep trying to find different ways of telling that story, knowing that the industry is not going to support it. My industry is not going to support it because it's history, from my perspective, on the relationship between Britain and India over 100 years. It's absolutely critical to get that made right now because people have amnesia and they don't understand, why we're here, basically, is why I want to make that film. But I have to think, how am I going to do it, And I actually now think I might do it with students. I might do it as a student project and work with students, with their facilities. And so they become part of the process of it. Because, again, it comes back to education and legacy and so I'm really interested in just finding different ways to talk about history, because what I find my films have become is a history of our presence in Britain, from the 60s to today, and also how people write about the films is a history of race and representation, both populist and academic, as, over the last, 30 odd years since I've been making films. And so now going back and talking about history is really important to me to kind of feel that, do that, complete that cycle. But I also do still love music. And so I am making a film about a big 80s icon, music icon, who I can't say yet, but you'll know who it is. Everyone will be singing the songs, but because I love music so much, and I actually loved this person as well. And so it's a great story about an Indian girl and music, a bit like Blinded. So I still am doing that, but there are so many political films that I would love to make, so many films, but someone like me, I'm getting tired of trying to do that duck and dive. I'm tired of it because I'm like, you should be running to me to give me money to make films, is my attitude. You should be running to me. No one's making films like me. No one has that perspective. You can still make everything you want, but show this perspective, and it surprises me that people don't. And so I've had to finally sit back and go, why are they not? And that's why I talked about the reaction to Christmas Karma, because in a way I stepped back and went, wow, that's actually what a lot of people think, but they don't get to say it, And one little anecdote I'll tell you, which is absolutely true, because you mentioned TV, and so you're talking about Beecham House, which was supposed to be my big upstairs, downstairs series about the East India Company and Britain in India. And I thought it was a great idea and, really said, it was great. I loved it. Anyway, we did the first series and PBS wanted to recommission it, but ITV didn't. And partly because they felt it was quite a BBC project,
We do need to end it here and on that note, but I just want to pick up on that phrase, that the history of our presence. And I know how you feel about academics, but I am waiting for that PhD with that title, The History of Our Presence on Gurinder Chadha's films. And of course,
because history is written by the victors, isn't it?
Yeah. So anyway, everyone, please, I'm afraid we can't take any more questions. I'm sorry, but please join me in thanking Gurinder for this evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you to the entire BFI archive team and everybody who's been behind putting the archive in, because there is shit in there that I don't even know about. So people are going to have a good old laugh, but it's also very commendable of you to spend the time to do that, because I think that one of the things is someone like me doesn't really get taken that seriously. And part of that is because I do all this self-deprecating stuff. But it, as this young man said here, there are people all over the world who write to me to say what you just said. And thank you for being seen, and thank you for Bendit, and thank you for Bride, and thank you because they're being seen, and because you don't represent the people who finance and distribute films. You are you. That's completely validating for me, because out of 100 people, if one person goes, oh, that made sense to me, that's why I do it. And that's why I did it in the first place. So all in all, what a lovely evening. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.